German submarines during the Second World War posed a furious threat to Allied merchant shipping, as Churchill noted in his memoirs. The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boot Pearl. In this video we take a short look at the so-called Wolfpack Tactics and also how a single submarine attacked enemy ships. Let's start with the Wolfpack Tactics, or Rudeltaktik in German, although the more common yet also more mundane German name was actually Gruppentaktik, meaning group tactics. At first glance these tactics are a rather simple affair. Unlike submarines attacking merchant vessels alone, they would group together and attack a convoy together. Group tactics were basically the counter to deal with merchant ships in convoys. The basic idea of group tactics go back to the experience of the German U-boat force during the First World War. For a long time the British Admiralty didn't introduce the convoy system. Yet once it was introduced, the German U-boats had a serious problems. The oceans became almost empty, and the few times they encountered convoys, they couldn't press for an attack due to large numbers. Thus there were ideas to deploy a command U-boat to coordinate the attack of several U-boats. Yet due to changes in leadership and also limitations in radio equipment, group tactics were neither fully developed nor used during the First World War. In the interwar years the concept was further developed. The ideas of Wolfpack tactics developed between 1935 and 1939 had some similarity with the plans of the First World War already described, although they were modified by progress made in signals technique. This meant that submarines could receive radio messages from land-based headquarters in every part of the ocean. Additionally, the U-boat could also send back messages to Germany, thus allowing the coordination of several submarines even from Germany. Yet the pre-war idea was that if the convoy was found, the flotilla commander on one of the U-boats was to take over tactical leadership of the pack and see that contact with the convoy was maintained until the other boats in the pack came up. If contact was lost, the tactical commander had to give the appropriate order to find the convoy again. Once the Second World War started, the British switched to convoy operations without much of a delay. As a reaction, the commander of the German submarine arm, Karl Dönitz, tested this concept of group attack in early October 1939, where a group of 6 U-boats should attack convoys. The first attack against the convoy with Wolfpacks had an interesting result. If we take a look at 2 authors in the field. Blair notes, in reality the first pack was so far a disaster. 3 of its 6 U-boats sunk, only 4 ships of the Caribbean convoy H33 positively sunk, one of them a prohibited passenger liner. Yet Milner notes the following. From the German perspective, the assault on HG3, which warrants no notice in British accounts, was a qualified success, proof of the basic concept of pack attack on convoys. Now, as so often the devil is in the detail, none of the statements is particularly wrong, although one is clearly a bit less sober and in a way misleading. Now you're probably gonna ask why. Well, because the losses happened when the submarines were on the way to the rendezvous point. 1 ran into a mine and 2 were sunk by escort vessels of other convoys. As such, the losses did not happen during the attack of the Wolfpack on the convoy, but during the redeployment. Yes, the loss of 3 U-boats was a disaster, but it could have happened also during a regular redeployment. Another Wolfpack operation in the following month had even less success. Yet the main issue was that single U-boats at this point were more successful picking off stragglers and independent merchant ships. As such, single U-boats had plenty of easy targets, whereas organizing Wolfpacks was still an organizational challenge that warranted limited results. Simply put, they were too inefficient at this point. As such, Wolfpack's operations were temporarily stopped in November 1939. In 1940, the fall of France and Norway provided new submarine bases for the Kriegsmarine. Additionally, the Royal Navy needed more destroyers for anti-invasion duty, thus less escorts were available. Based on the experiences of 1940, Dönitz refined the Wolfpack tactics in several ways. First, it turned out that U-boats were best coordinated from headquarters on land than locally from a submarine. Experience had shown that it was not necessary to appoint a tactical commander for the U-boats making up a pack at sea. It repeatedly happened that in a decisive phase the tactical commander was forced by defense to submerge and so was eliminated as a leader. On the other hand, it was clear that the signal communication between shore headquarters and the U-boats worked so well that it was possible for the headquarters in Germany or Western France to provide tactical command of the U-boats with the convoy. Second, one submarine would shadow a convoy and provide headquarters regular with data on the convoy, which then would coordinate the deployment of the Wolfpack. Once in position, the order for attack was granted. Now it is important to note that submarines at this point were basically all on their own and not coordinated anymore. Dönitz Wolfpack strategy brought them together, but once in contact with the enemy, each U-boat skipper attacked independently. Originally it was planned for the U-boats to coordinate locally, yet the installed equipment was considered useless and usually removed before operational deployment. Yet this didn't mean that the U-boats were completely uncoordinated, since they basically passively coordinated. When a group of U-boats operated against a convoy, cooperation between the boats was maintained because the boats were ready to receive on the prescribed frequency on the shortwave and to send their own messages on this wavelength. The messages from the U-boats were regularly repeated by shore headquarters at fixed times so that all U-boats could receive them, irrespective of whether they had or had not already heard the first signal from the contact keeper. As you probably can imagine, this approach had a major weakness, namely large number of signals could be used by enemy intelligence, especially for direction finding. As such, there were rules when and where to break radio silence, the use of codes and frequencies. For instance, one rule was to send messages ideally only before major changes of position. As such, direction finding was made more difficult. Since a shadowing U-boat regularly submitted the location of the convoy it followed, and that signal had a distinct code word at the beginning, it was quite easy for British signal intelligence to identify them. Once the position was determined by direction finding, the convoy could be warned. But as long as the escort commander did not know on which side of the convoy the U-boat was keeping contact, it was always a risky business for him to allow his generally too few escorts to make sorties in this or that direction at a critical moment before a turn in hope of trying to force the U-boat to submerge. Yet once high-frequency direction-finding equipment was advanced enough to be mounted on ships, this posed a serious threat to any submarine sending a message near such a ship. Now some of you might know that the Germans will use the WWII Condor to attack convoys, and you might think, well, wouldn't it make more sense to use these rather fragile aircraft to provide reconnaissance for the submarines, instead of going low and risking to get torn up by anti-aircraft fire? Well, you have a good point, the Kriegsmarine actually tried this. And I found two different accounts why this did not work out. Symonds notes the following. This partnership of airplane and U-boat never fully developed, however, in part because of shortage of Condor aircraft and in part because Göring was jealously proprietary of the Luftwaffe. Yet personally I find the more practical accounts of both Milner and Rohwer far more valid and substantial. In early January 1941, Dönitz obtained operational control over Kampfgeschwader 40 and its WWII 200 Condors, and set them to work looking for convoys west of Britain. The idea was the aircraft would locate convoys and draw the U-boats in. Early efforts were not successful. Rohwer explains that usually the aircraft could not maintain contact with the convoy long enough for a U-boat to approach. In addition, the operations were made more difficult by the inaccurate navigation of the aircraft. Conversely, however, U-boats repeatedly found convoys in this phase of the battle, 1941, and were able, with their direction-finding signals, to guide the Condor aircraft of Kampfgeschwader 40 to these convoys. I found this information quite surprising, but it's also a good reminder that navigation across oceans for planes was quite difficult, and also explains why usually even single-engine naval bombers had a dedicated navigator with them. Quite ironically, the way submarines spotted many of the convoys was by moving in a patrol line. The idea was to deploy the U-boats in a long reconnaissance line along a north-south axis, making it more likely that one of them would encounter a transatlantic convoy and report its location. This was basically a line abreast formation, where the U-boats theoretically kept a distance to each other of 2 times the maximum spotting range, so that in theory no ships could slip through that line. In practice, bad weather, navigational errors and changes in visibility created various problems. Of course, the German Radio Intelligence Service also provided information to move patrol lines into correct positions and increase their chances. Now, since we covered the basic of Wolfpack tactics and we learned that once the U-boats were off the leash they mainly acted alone, it is time to take a look at different tactics and approaches of individual submarines. And by the way, if you want to know what the German U-boat aces thought about the movie Das Boot, be sure to check out this video from my second channel. Anyway, let's start with the submerged torpedo attack. This seems the obvious attack variant for a submarine, yet it wasn't. After all, we should remember that U-boats, like other contemporary submarines, were not true submarines, rather they were really submersibles. Although their primary design feature was the ability to operate submerged and to deliver an attack from periscope depth, their diesel-electric propulsion system was air-breathing. Forced to rely on its electric motors, however, a sub could move at only a walking pace for a day or so, at most. If forced to sprint at up to 9 knots while submerged, a U-boat would exhaust its batteries in a little more than an hour. A torpedo attack is a quite complicated affair. First, the enemy must be spotted. Second, the submarine must put itself in a favorable attack position without being spotted. This requires that the submarine is fast enough or is already in a proper position. Third, distance, bearing and speed of the enemy vessel must be determined. Fourth, based on this data, the submarine must be positioned and the torpedo set properly. To give you some better ideas, some quotes from the wartime translation of the official U-boat commander manual. The object of the underwater attack is to discharge a torpedo with the certainty of hitting, but without warning and at short range. The shorter the distance between the submarine and the target, the more reliable the assessment of the speed, course and position of the enemy. It is also noted that the minimum rate should be 300 meters due to safety. For the preparation of the attack, it is necessary that the submarine is in proper position. On account of the low underwater speed of the submarine, a position forward of the beam of the enemy is a necessity when making the underwater attack proper. The initial position for the underwater attack must be more forward of the enemy's beam, the greater the distance between the submarine and the enemy. Once the submarine is in proper ambush position, it proceeds with monitoring the targets and moving to an ideal firing position. The manual notes several aspects that are important with the usage of the periscope. First, it should only be used when the submarine is traveling at a low speed, as it would create too much of a wake. Second, the periscope should be used sparingly. Yet third, it should also be used to carry out frequent observations, since seeing nothing is even a greater danger. In overall, the tone of the manual is a mix between being cautious in the approach, yet bold in pressing the attack. The rare opportunity of attacking an enemy concentration of ships must be used by going all out with all the torpedoes, even in spite of the strongest enemy escort. The manual notes further that even at close ranges several torpedoes should be used against a single target if there's a proper supply of torpedoes. Furthermore, if there's uncertainty about the fire solution, a fan pattern of several torpedoes 2 to 4 should be used. It is better to score only one hit than to miss the target with each of several consecutive shots. Generally, the attack should follow the principle, better to destroy little than to damage much. Now, if you want to learn more about how underwater explosions damage ships, be sure to check out this video. Now let's take a look at the surface torpedo attack, which was for the early years of the war the common attack method during the night. There are several reasons for this. First, as mentioned before, a submarine was very slow submerged and had a very limited amount of range, since it needed to run on batteries. Second, as the first submarine was basically invisible to sonar. For the British, the supposedly new German tactics of Wolfpack U-boat attack was an unpleasant surprise. The escorts had to look on at the attacks helplessly. The SDIC sonar underwater equipment was ineffective against the U-boats because they attacked on the surface. Third, since U-boats were so small, basically only the conning tower stuck out. And at night, ships had a hard time spotting anything that is small. Thus, the U-boats could move mostly undetected towards or sometimes right into the convoys, unless the escorts were equipped with radars, which in the early years of the war was rather uncommon. About the surface attack, the U-boat commander manual notes the following. The surface torpedo attack by the submarine can only be carried out at night. The object of the surface attack is the same as the underwater attack and dependent on same ballistic factors, i.e. the torpedo attack at short range which is carried out without warning and takes the enemy by surprise. In general, the rules are the same as for the underwater attack. Additionally, it notes, in sea areas where contact with the enemy may be expected at night, at least one torpedo must be carried in the tube, with the tube opened ready for action. If the enemy is sighted suddenly, there may in certain circumstances not be enough time to open the tube. Again, the submarine should move ahead of the convoy to reach a desired position ahead of the enemy's beam. The direction on encountering enemy escort ships make a clear mention of the strength and weaknesses of U-boats. Try to evade the escort ships as far as is possible without submerging in order to retain your mobility and to be able to take in the situation. On the surface, the submarine commander remains master of the situation. If the submarine submerges, it becomes blind and stationary, and must leave it to the enemy to bring about any change of the position on the surface. Similar to instructions on what to do after an attack. After the night surface attack, the commander should endeavor to stay on the surface in order to observe the success of the attack, and if conditions are favorable, to organize a second and third attack. Do not go down unless it is necessary. Going down renders you blind and helpless. On the surface, the commander continues to be able to take in the situation and retains his liberty of action. The submarine should therefore only submerge when compelled to do so by direct pursuit. Another option, especially in the early days of the war, was using the deck gun to attack the enemy merchant ships. The ability to use the deck gun could extend a patrol, since the number of torpedoes carried was one of the principal restrictions on the duration of a patrol. Although the official U-boat manual explains that the deck gun had some clear drawbacks. The submarine as a gunnery vessel is in itself properly a contradiction in terms, being incapable of offering powerful resistance, and because of its slow and unstable gunnery and controlling platforms, which are directly exposed to the action of the sea, it cannot be said to be built for artillery combat. As such, it should only be used against merchant shipping. The manual notes that during the war almost all enemy merchant ships are armed, and that neutral markings might be misleading. Thus, proper identification of the ship and its armament, as well as the positioning of the submarine, are crucial. The use of gunnery against an armed enemy can only succeed if heavy hits are at once scored on the enemy, at minimum range with the help of the element of surprise, and if the submarine is also in a position to prevent the manning and use of the enemy's gunnery by bringing all its light weapons to bear on the enemy. It is noted that such conditions are usually only provided during dusk or night. The submarine should approach while using the cover of darkness, wind and sea. The initial shots should use incendiary armor. It is particularly important that the ship should burn, as the gun commanders are dazzled by the flames and marking is rendered very difficult. It is important to keep the submarine positioned that it is least exposed. Additionally, during the whole attack, lookouts should keep watch. Should the enemy ship be armed? As soon as the enemy ship in an artillery duel begins to find the range, the submarine must turn away or submerge. According to Stern, the last recorded deck gun attack happened in spring 1942, and in November 1942 the deck guns were officially removed. Note that the A-guns were still used or even additional ones added. To summarize, similar to other tactics, Wolfpack Tactics had their origins in the First World War, yet to the technical limitation and other circumstances didn't see action before the Second World War. The first Wolfpacks were very inefficient, since there were plenty of targets of opportunity outside of convoys present. As such, finding a convoy, organizing a Wolfpack and directing it to the convoy was an unnecessary overhead in the early days of the war. Later on, once independent ships became less common, Wolfpacks were an ideal counter to convoys that often lacked a sufficient number of escorts with radar and experienced crews. Coordination from land via radio directed the submarines to the convoys, which then were shot up by the U-boats that usually attacked surface at night. Yet once radar became more common on escort ships, this approach was not viable anymore. Note that in the first half of 1943, most of these tactics became ineffective due to major changes in technology, tactics, organization, air cover, and force structure. Although looking at March 1943, this was not yet apparent. In the first 20 days of March 1943, the U-boats came nearest to the aim of interrupting the lines of communication between the old world and the new, when they sank 39 merchant ships out of 4 successive convoys. Yet only a few weeks later, the battle in the Atlantic looked quite different. By any measure, May 1943 was a catastrophic month for the U-boat fleet. No fewer than 41 submarines were sunk, the single highest loss of any month in the war. One of them carried Dönitz's only son to a watery grave. On May 24th, Dönitz admitted tactical defeat and recalled the Wolfpacks from the mid-Atlantic. Thank you here to all my Patreons who make these videos possible to be free for everyone. Also a big thank you here to Andrew and Justin for reviewing and correcting the script. As always, sources are linked in the description. Thank you for watching and see you next time.